SEC sues Binance. That's the world's largest crypto exchange, now squarely within the sights of the U.S. securities regulator. Now, there are 13 charges here, many of which stem from the trading of what are alleged to be unregistered securities, in addition to some other alleged misdeeds on the part of Binance and key executives. A lot to unpack here. I'm going to toss it to Wendy O for her initial thoughts. Wendy, what do you think?
So I do think that this was kind of expected because the SEC loves to go back retroactively and punish people for alleged bad things they did when they're too lazy to go ahead and institute any types of laws, regulations, or guidelines. But what's very interesting about this story is Patrick Hillman, who is the chief comms officer at Binance, he went ahead and just tweeted this: for every journalist calling and asking, bizarrely, we have not even been given a copy of the complaint ourselves. Smart PR move to rob us of our right to defend ourselves publicly. So there's a little bit of conflicting information that's going on the internet right now. And this does sound like behavior that the SEC would do. So it's very upsetting to hear that they weren't properly given notice, but it's now like viral on the internet. So that's my thoughts on it. Who else wants to take it? Will?
Yeah, digging into the meat of the story, there's a lot on the line here, right? And we've seen a lot of these SEC stories in the past, and it's confusing to know like where things are going to end up because these are ongoing litigation cases, right? So we don't have like firm information about what the courts are going to decide when this goes to trial or as this progresses, if there's a settlement. But we do know some hard facts within this case, which is the SEC sees the BUSD token, sees BNB token, sees Matic, Solana, a few other tokens that are notable and basically household names at this point as securities. So what could that mean? Well, at the very least, it means that U.S. investors probably should stay away from these in the eyes of the SEC. And a lot of people over the last 2-3 years have invested in these tokens quite a bit. Solana went on a huge bull run in 2021, and now it's listed in this documentation, BNB, which has been sort of like a quasi-security for Binance. Binance trying to be separate from the rest of the US. So kind of use it as a security token. You know, you purchase it and you got some revenue based on like how the trading volumes were going like that. It's listed here. I think Binance would disagree, especially because it's outside the jurisdiction of the US. But in this case, the SEC doesn't think so. And one really key fact here is that they're bringing up the geolocation of residence again, right? And in the documentation, in this report, which you can go read on CoinDesk, or go read the article on CoinDesk, you can see that they talk about how U.S. citizens were being served by Binance even after that 2019 breaking between Binance and Binance US. Looks like executives, including CZ, told everyone at Binance to continue serving high-profile U.S. clients, which is a big problem for Binance. The one thing I'm curious about with this is the separation between where Binance was and where Binance is going in the future. We'll get into that with the next story with the possible new hiring and future CEO. They're sort of like preparing for a role. But I do think that sort of comes into the story, right? A lot of these crypto companies moved hard and fast and broke things, and they're going to have to pay for doing so. But if they can survive past that judgment, then there's a future for them. Jen, I'll throw it over to you.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember us talking about a story about Binance customer service representatives helping people who work in, who live in different jurisdictions to access the platform. This obviously, I don't think when we spoke about it, it was the US, but it's interesting to see those parallels that the SEC was kind of looking into executives at Binance, overlooking some of the processes that were in place, or allegedly overlooking some of the processes that were in place to allow them access to Binance.com. This story is interesting to me when we juxtapose it against a story we spoke about on First Mover this morning. So Nick Day talked to us about a draft bill that was released on Friday. It's called the Crypto Oversight Proposal. It's a Republican bill that looks to get the CFTC and the SEC on the same page, sort out a bunch of the issues that we talk about on this show every day. And what's really interesting about this draft bill is this safe harbor element. And so the bill calls for the safe harbor timeline where firms, investors can continue to act as is until rules are set for the CFTC and the SEC. So to see that happening at Congress, and then to see the SEC go out there and sue all of the big crypto firms in the US, is a really interesting discourse that I think it's just going to be interesting to follow over the next little while, how these two very kind of different ways of looking at regulation in the U.S. play out. Zach?
Yeah, I mean, we saw the SEC go after Coinbase. Of course, they're going to go after Binance as well. Obviously, if it touches a U.S. investor, they think that it's within their rights to go after these firms, and we've seen it happen time and time again. Gary Gensler is not mincing words in this complaint. He's saying that Binance engaged in, quote, an extensive web of deception, conflicts of interest, lack of disclosure, and calculated evasion of the law, end quote. So the rhetoric is certainly heightened as they announce this thing. I think it's going to be interesting to see if any exchanges follow suit and taking action on the assets that are alleged to be securities. There's a bit of enforcement fatigue, I think, in the industry. If you go back to when the SEC filed suit against Ripple Labs over the issuance of XRP, you saw a bunch of delistings of XRP. I don't know if we're going to see that in turn from some of these major assets that are listed here in this complaint, but I think certainly that is, what the SEC is trying to do, establish some case law around what stuff falls within their purview and therefore what can be traded and where, right? Because if these assets get deemed securities, it sort of makes the existing incumbents in the crypto exchange world have to get additional licensure, jump through additional hoops, and therefore a lot of the liquidity dries up as it traditionally exists in these markets. So I think for these projects that are named here, that's really what's at stake, rather than just, a cut and dry commodities versus securities designation. So interesting to see ultimately what plays out here. Obviously, a lot of rumors about the future of CZ at Binance as well. We will talk about that shortly, but I want to throw it to Wendy for her thoughts.
I don't know. Again, I'm just very frustrated with all of the news that's coming out and how it's always Binance that gets attacked and always gets hit really hard. Like we had the people from Celsius, they're still out and running. FTX, the people are still out and running, but time and time again, we keep hearing mainstream media continue to go after Binance and CZ. So it makes me kind of think what is actually happening behind the scenes. And again, I'm not saying that they were innocent. I'm not saying that they didn't do anything wrong. It's just very interesting to see how mainstream media is portraying and covering these stories. And again, it's very frustrating because it doesn't feel like it's fair access. Another thing that's very interesting to me, Jen, when you were talking about the bill that was introduced, was it Friday that they brought, that Friday. The news dropped? It's very interesting because we do know that the Democrats are 100% against crypto, any way, shape, or form. Like we hear Elizabeth Warren, she came out and said that crypto was part of the problem when it came to a specific illicit substance. And we hear the red side, kind of champion a little bit, but not necessarily. So it's interesting to see politically how this is going to get set up for the next election. I know that I've told my audience I'm voting for whoever is pro crypto or pro Bitcoin. Don't care about the social issues anymore. I've said my piece.